Hi everybody, I'm Joe Parker of the Pixel Depot. So I've got my grungy sweatshirt on, so that must mean that we're going to do a build today. A little while ago, although it seems like forever ago in some ways, I did a video about planning out the structures for the grunge layout, the layout that you see behind me. And one of the things that we talked about was what to do with the space in between American Can and what was planned to be Darlington Electronic Instruments. And I didn't have any ideas at the time for what to put in there, so I put it up to you guys to give me some suggestions. The suggestion that I liked the best was a sign maker, and that was suggested to me by my friend Peter Smith. So we are going to build out PJ Smith & Sons sign makers today. The kit that I'm using for this video is a Lunde Studios quick flat. I picked it up at a train show a little while back for under $20, but this was a really good compromise in terms of finding something that was relatively inexpensive that was going to fit the space that I had on the layout, so I decided to go with it. This kit is made of resin, not styrene, so the construction techniques are just a little bit different. The biggest thing is that the resin requires CA as an adhesive, and anyone who is a regular viewer of these videos knows that I have a hate-hate relationship with CA, so this should be an adventure. In today's video, we're going to cover the main construction process for this building. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, so let's get to the build. The first thing that I needed to do was measure the space that I had available. The American Can Company, of course, was well placed, and that wasn't going to be going anywhere. And I liked the location of the Darlington Electronic Instruments building, shown here as just a mock-up, in the place where it is because it fits nice and symmetrically between the turnout points. However, that only left me about 9 3/4 inches in order to put the building in. What I didn't realize when I bought the kit, just because of the way that it is packaged, is that there are 2 main walls in there, and those walls are about 5 3/4 inches each. And then there's 3 pilasters in there that come in at about 3/16 of an inch each. So the total space I was going to need without cutting anything down was about 12 inches. That was more space than I wanted to use because it was going to move the Darlington building over to the left a little bit too much. So I decided that I needed to remove one of the panels from the main wall and we would cut everything down. That section was about 2 inches, which would give us an overall width of about 10 inches. And I thought moving the Darlington building over just that 1/4 of an inch or so wasn't going to impact the feel that I was looking for that much. That's what I decided to do. Some time back I bought this kit and I thought it would be a good fit for the Smith Sign Company. So I've already taken it out of the package to check it out, do some measurements and so on before I started this video. It actually comes with quite a bit of stuff in it. More than it appeared from the package. Gives you the windows, instruction sheet, parts list, which was handy. I'm going to take these off the cardboard just so you can see them. So the first thing I need to do is trim this down, and I'm actually going to need to trim down one of these pieces as well, and probably the roof and everything else. Although I say that's the first step, but the first step really is to take these pieces off of the cardboard. They're stuck on there with glue. These pieces are resin, by the way, and that's something that I haven't really done as a structure before. I've done plenty of moldings and things like that, but I've never really built a structure per se out of resin. We're going to end up cutting off about 2 inches from a number of these pieces. So after cutting those pieces off, now I'm going to remove everything from their sprues and sand things down. Then I'm going to go wash all the pieces to make sure that there's no release agent or anything left on that. Once those dry, then I'll go through and paint it. So I'm going to go ahead and start removing these pieces. I'm using my Micromark sprue cutters. I love these. I've been using them for years. I actually have more than one pair. I keep them in various places so that I always have access to them. I will put a link to these in the description below, and if you use the code Pixel Depot when you check out, you will get 10% off your Micromark order. So I encourage you to go out and check those out. Removing all these pieces here. Still got the glue on the back from where it was attached to the cardboard. These actually need to come apart, and I'm going back and forth as to whether I do that now or after I wash them. At the very least, I can take some of this flash off here. It is one drawback to having the pieces glued to the cardboard when it comes in, is that sometimes that glue, especially if it's been sitting for a while, I think this, I've had this kit for a little while, and I think it was on the shelf for a little while before that. Can be a little difficult to get that glue off if it's set up a little bit, even though it's relatively flexible. These should be good. Those weren't on a sprue at all. Didn't mention this before, but there's a bag here that came with the kit as well that's got smaller pieces in it. This was to kind of keep them all together, so I'm going to pull those out and make sure that nothing's on sprues there. And there are some things that will need to get filed down. These are going to get split with a hobby knife, so I'm not too worried about flash or anything on those, because they're going to sit behind like this, so you're not going to notice that anyway. But these pieces here, I will remove the stuff, sand it down. Should just snap off. Quick hit with the emery board to get rid of all the flash. You'll notice that I'm sanding these at an angle because I don't want to take any of the brick detail off. So I'm just trying to hit this back edge here. On the tops and bottoms, there's no molded in detail, so it's not as big a deal. So this is the awning over the doors. End up butting up together, so we want to make sure that's flush. Pretty good. Last but not least, for this one I am going to use these other sprue cutters just to make sure I'm not damaging the pieces. These are pretty thick. I think that's everything. So now we'll go and do some washing, get the dust and the oils and any release agent off of these pieces. I'm going to put these back in the bag so that I don't lose them during transport, and we'll be back. So after doing some research on Lunde Studios kits and comparisons of colors that I wanted to make this structure, I made some decisions about the painting. So I did decide to paint the windows and the roof and the awning that are included with the kit. I did not paint the sidewalk pieces that you see here, just because they're already a pretty decent color for concrete, and with some weathering I'll be able to make those look pretty good. And the reason for that is that this is a resin kit. It's not the standard styrene plastic kit. With these being resin pieces, they're a little different. They don't have a shine. It's a very matte surface. And honestly, I really liked the color that this was right out of the box. So I didn't want to change that. I couldn't find anything that was close enough in my paint collection to use as an alternative. And so I decided just to keep it the base color. Now what I am going to do, and this is based on the request of a couple people, is give it some mortar color. I've got this. This just came from Michael's or Walmart or someplace like that. It's craft paint. This happens to be apple barrel toffee. And I'm just going to make a light wash and then apply that to the surface here. I don't plan on keeping this for use afterwards, so I'm just going to use this cup here. Put a little dab in there, because again, I don't want this to be very much at all. And then I'm just going to dilute it with alcohol. It's just kind of eyeballing it. I would suggest no more than, a 1 to 10 kind of mix. And I'm going to throw some more in. The alcohol will evaporate. So, just trying to get this in, and we'll do this pretty quickly. Got this scrap piece from when I cut it down. So I'm just going to test this here on this piece. And I'm just using a soft brush for this. The idea here is that, we'll put this in here and it'll kind of fill the gaps. And I'm trying to just kind of hit the top and let it run down. You can see it fill in. So the idea here is that, we've got tan brick and just using the brown as a darker mortar. And we just dab that on there, compare that. It is a little bit darker. Might want to go a little more. So I'm going to, whoops, if I don't spill things. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to let it dry for a minute with the mortar color in there, without dabbing it off. Let's see what happens. Alright, so after a couple of minutes and some time in front of the fan to make the alcohol evaporate, you can see here that there is a slight but noticeable difference between the unpainted piece and the piece that I put the wash on for the mortar. I'm going to kind of move through this before the alcohol evaporates, and I'm actually going to use a slightly larger brush so that I can get through these pretty quickly. And I'm just doing a, kind of a quick brush through here just to spread that on there. And those will dry. These are the pilaster pieces that I didn't remove the top. I will do that afterwards. The idea here is just to kind of spread this around. Interestingly enough, the alcohol is evaporating very quickly. Alright, so we'll get into the big walls here, and I did add a little bit more alcohol to this mix again. I'm just trying to spread this around. If some paint blotches in an area or two, like happened right there, it's just going to look like weathering. It's not the end of the world by any stretch. But I also don't want to go too dark. Quickly hit these before this completely dries up. So we're going to let that dry a little bit, and then we'll come back and start our assembly. These are fairly dry now, so in preparation for gluing, I have gotten some wax paper because we're going to be using CA, and I don't want things to stick to my pad. I'm actually going to start in the middle. Apply a bead here. And this should give us enough, since it's thick, should give us enough drying time, or time to do this without worrying about it setting. I'm using a straight edge here, per the recommendations of the instructions, to get things on there. And I am also going to use these clamps, or hopefully have it set up without me having to hold it the whole time. So I'm just doing some dry fitting with the awning to make sure that it's going to fit in the groove that is there. So I don't want to glue it in place and then find out. It doesn't go in there very well. So now we'll follow up with the other side. Okay. Now while I was off camera, I did clip, if you'll recall, these pieces were attached by a small piece of, could call it a sprue, I guess, but it was really just connected with a piece of resin. And I took those apart, sanded them down a little bit. Just running a thin bead of glue down the sides here. Just running that thin bead on the other side. Glue those in place. Just double checking my spacing again, just to make sure that that's going to go in there correctly. Minor adjustments. I'd have to file that piece out a little bit. Alright, so we've got our main wall put together. I will use some Lego bracing on the back, especially along the bottom here, but before I do that I want to finish putting these pieces together. So now we'll put the cornices and the pilaster caps in place using essentially the same process. I'm actually going to start with this pilaster cap, just so I've got something in the middle to work from. I'll let that dry. That's going to be our keystone area, if for lack of a better term. Glue to the sides here and the bottom of this cap piece. We're going to drop that on there. So I'm doing some measurement here and just making sure that things are going to fit the right way, and both of these caps on the end are going to be off a little bit. And part of that is because I cut this section down, so, you know, and I eyeballed it, so the ends might not be perfect. We should be able to sand that down. So all I'm doing here is just using my emery board on the flat surface and just taking a little bit off. Still a little much. Now I won't have the luxury of the flat surface on this one, and hopefully I don't pop it off from the glue, but I'll try to be gentle as I can. And that should work. Just a quick test fit to see how that's going to look. I think that's going to be okay. Now think about the side walls. They came with the two side walls. This one, for some reason, has some bizarre pattern on it that was actually there when I took it out of the box. I'm not quite sure what that is. So that's going to go on this side where it's going to be hidden up against the Darlington Electronic Instruments building. So we'll end up using our square here to make sure that everything is flush. And then we'll do some bracing on the back. So I'm going to use my squares here to make sure that the bottom is flush as well as the sides are flush. And these I also bought from Micromark, so I will include the link to these. I find that these squares come in handy for so many different things. Weights, square edges, you name it. As always, I'm going to do some bracing with Lego. Drop that in that corner. So one of the things that happened here was that this wasn't laying perfectly flat when I glued it down. I have just made a notch. That whole piece is going to lay flat except for that one spot. That side's going to be hidden from view anyway, so it's not a big deal. This is really more for more structural integrity than anything else. But we are going to repeat that process. Bead of glue in there. Get my 1, 2, 3 block in here. Just make sure that everything stays put as best as possible. You can see I braced the corners here with Lego. I also put some bracing along here. So the Lego will also help it stand up straight. And like I said, I'm concerned about this piece here, so let's brace that up. I've gotten a couple of comments along the way from people who have said that they think that Lego is too expensive to use as bracing. And if you were to go out and pay full price for a set, I would tend to agree. But my suggestion has always been to seek out inexpensive sets at yard sales and so on to try and minimize that cost. And even if you do order the pieces online, you're only looking at pennies per piece. Alright, so after a little bit of fighting to get that flush and in the right place, let that dry a little bit, and then we will continue with our build. While we wait for our glue to dry, I am going to use this time to trim the windows and the doors so that those are ready to go. Those all come as one casting here to be split apart. There we go. So those are just breaking along the score lines that I made. What I want to do now is glue these doors in. I'm just going to test all these now and make sure that they drop in there the way I expect them to, and that they clear the Lego bracing that I put in that was clearly not part of the original build. Once again, we'll grab my trusty toothpick, and I'm just going to go around the edges with the CA. Put our weight on there so that hopefully it gives it some extra support. Hopefully when I flip this up, when it's done drying, all the doors are in the right way. I'm pretty sure that I was careful in orienting them, but we will see when we get there. Alright, giving that some time to dry. And we're going to give it a test fit again over at the layout just and see how things look. So, looking pretty good. What you'll notice here is that this is so close to the backdrop that if I leave the windows clear, you're going to be able to see that fake backdrop building in the back. So what I'm more likely to do is to paint the quote-unquote window glass, the acetate that comes along with it, black, and just glue that to the back of the windows. So we've got 10 windows that we need to do, and I painted more than 10, so got some extras, which is fine. So this is exactly the width of my ruler, so instead of trying to do it the hard way, I'm just cut this way. Now that we have those cut out, I can attach them using Future, this floor polish. All I'm going to do is dip the brush in the Future and give it a good slathering on here. And then just stick our window frame on there. That's going to stick over time. It will actually adhere to the plastic. We'll let that all dry. So the next phase is to build the dock. So I'm just going to go about doing that the same way that I did the main part of the building. My other piece came out well. We will brace that up because it's going to be a fairly fragile piece. But what's going to happen here is these pieces will stick on the sides here like so. There'll be a concrete piece that sits on top. Butt those up and let that dry. These stone pieces will sit on top when we're done and provide a deck surface, so to speak. So here I've got the dock area, and this is going to attach to this building. So to get it as square as possible and get as much surface area for gluing as possible, I am going to use my Lego pieces. So I repeated that process for this side as well over here, and this side is actually still drying, so I'm going to be careful. I wanted to put the roof in just so that I could get that taken care of. And the roof, I sanded some of the paint off here so that it'll stick better when I do put it on there. The roof fits in here like this. Go like this. That's going to sit across the bottom like that. And then once that's in, I will actually need to trim this side so that it stays flush. I'm actually going to lay this down with the deck off of the edge so that I can lay this in here like so. Hold that in place. I could clamp it, but I'm just going to let it go. So with that in place, measure this side as well. So I'm going to mark this with my pen. Alright, so with that cut down, we're going to test fit this here. Look at that, like a glove. Like a glove. Load up our glue here. Drop that into place. You can remove this stuff. It's going to need a little bit of surgery, but not too bad. So far, looking pretty good. Let's get our windows in. I'm doing this second window here. It's clear the acetate hasn't completely adhered to the backs of the windows, so I'm going to wait a little longer to do the rest of these. A couple of hours have passed. These seem to be sticking pretty well now. So we're going to go through now and stick these on. We've got our weights on there, and I'll give it a couple of minutes to attach. It should only take a minute or two with the medium CA for things to really grab. And then what we're going to do is install these. I'm going to have to cut one of them down. Full disclosure, I did sand these down and in an effort to make sure that they would fit into the grooves on the other side as easily as possible, and then I repainted them. And then the other pieces that we have are these sidewalk pieces. I still did not paint these, but I did put a matte coat of matte sealant on there, and we'll put those in place, or at least test fit them, and we'll cut that down as well, because again, I took a slice out of the building, so these are all too long. Those have been sitting there for a minute or so. I also took the liberty of this bracing piece along there on the back, just so that it would have some extra stability there. I'm actually going to keep that there for another minute. Alright, so another opportunity to kind of see this on the layout. You can see how it kind of fits in there, and the backdrop structure appears just over the rooftop, and that does look a little odd, so I might have to put some details or something on the the roof up there. I don't think from that angle you can really tell what's going on there. In terms of the structure itself, we'll get the overhang on there as well as the dock covering, and we'll be almost finished. Just a quick mark there on that. And we're going to do the same thing for these roof panels here. And hopefully that'll sit in there a little bit better. And what I'm going to do here is use my square so that I can use it as a mark for where the roof needs to end. So cut those pieces down, and it actually took a little bit of the paint off, so I'm going to have to touch that up afterwards, but not a big deal. So now we should be able to drop this in here like this. And then drop this piece in here like this. And those will butt up against each other. And same thing here. Drop this in like this. Going to do the tops of this section here. Drop this in here like this. And then we're going to do this. And then drop that on there. If we remove our weights now, see the sidewalk is, I keep saying sidewalk, but it's really a concrete covering. Just put another quick bead in there. And so long as the structure remains straight, it should take. So with that in place now, I'm going to put the other side in. Same process, bead of glue. A little bit of CA on the edge here so that those hopefully line up. This one, I think I sanded it just a little too much. It's looser than the other piece was. I'm going to try and get that to lay in there. Weights in there like so. Then I'm going to call it a night. So let's take a look at what we've got here. It seems pretty solid, and this part here is even. I do plan on putting some supports there. I don't know if that'll actually help structurally. One thing I did notice is that on the sides here, there are some gaps here, and this one, that just everything on the bottom here seems to be lined up, so I'm not quite sure what happened there, but this one is definitely me. I didn't brace it properly. We'll do some tricks there to cover that up. Over here, I may just put some steps in, which should cover that problem up there. So once again, we'll drop this in here just to see how it's going to look. That'll do just fine. Now, we still have a lot of things to do before I would call this structure complete. As I mentioned, there are some details like the steps next to the dock and the supports on the overhang over the dock. And there's going to be other details, weathering, and of course it needs a sign. We've talked about signs in other videos, and since this is a sign maker company, it would probably make sense that they would have some signage on the building. And we will cover that in the next video. That's all for today's episode, however. If you've had experience building resin kits, let me know in the comments below. I'd like to understand if you had any issues different or similar to what I had there. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have never built a full resin kit, even though the bridge that I did in a previous video used some resin pieces. So this was a new experience for me. And while I think it came out pretty well, there's probably some things I would do a little differently. So any hints and tips that you have would be welcome. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Also, don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell so that you'll get notified when there's new content available. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The links for those are in the description below. Finally, if you're looking for more great videos on model railroading, check out the links over here. I'm Joe Parker of the Pixel Depot. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you meet me next time in the train room.